Welcome to the Bonhoeffer Show with Bill Hull. The show about stuff most people try to avoid, but can't because it controls their lives. Religion, culture, and politics. Why does Bill Hull host this show? Because he and Bonhoeffer hoisted a few brews together in Berlin. Nope. That never happened. Is it that Bonhoeffer's book, The Cost of Discipleship, both challenged and changed Bill as a young man? Well, yes, that is part of it. But it's primarily because Bonhoeffer called us to a costly discipleship, and there has never been a time when such courage has been more absent or desperately needed than now. Bonhoeffer famously said, "Christianity without discipleship is always Christianity without Christ." The Bonhoeffer Project is committed to turning leaders into disciple makers, because if leaders fail to create disciple-making movements, then we have failed. So, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. He's still tall and good-looking, and yes, he is wearing German cologne. He's acquired a few more underlying conditions, but direct from his underground bunker in Long Beach, California, the man who once told Don Henley, "You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave," Bill Hull.
Welcome to Bonhoeffer Show Season 2. Yes, this is our 5th session. And you know that we've been talking about making different kinds of disciples for a difficult age. And this has to do with the idea that in the last 50 years, we've made disciples in the churches. We've made good ones, we've made bad ones, we've made average ones, we've made mediocre ones, but somehow we've missed the train, the cultural train that left the station, left us behind, and that we were not represented in the culture. We separated ourselves out. We became experts in how to become better church members, but maybe not better community members, maybe not better creative members of society. Now, this is a generalization, so forgive me. But then what's happened is that now we find ourselves in a culture that has become less Christian. So let me ask you this question. Should we take a hard look at what we've been doing? And I think we should. And so that's what this season is about, taking a very hard look at if we are going to continue to make disciples, would it be better if they were different kinds of disciples that we're engaging the culture, engaging the process of life, and we're beginning to experience the chaos, the moral chaos, political division, lots of things going on in our times, in our culture. So the question is, how are we supposed to act? Now, one picture in my mind is that the State of the Union address, and the State of the Union address is an interesting photo of American culture because we have representatives in Washington that are either of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And we have a few independents. And then we have the cabinet members who are there. Some of them have jobs that are nonpartisan to some degree, but yet they work for the executive branch, which is always partisan. And then down in the front, you have two groups of people. One is the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And you notice that they only can applaud for things that are accepted by both sides. And you have the Supreme Court, all robed and expressionless. And rarely do they applaud. So as Christian leaders, who are we? Are we the representative leaders of parties? Probably not. there's a spillage into that. And of course, as private citizens, we can do that, and everybody supports that. But the additional issue is, as Christian leaders, as representatives of the church, of the kingdom of God, as a different kingdom, who are we? Well, I think we can argue about this, but are we to be more like the Supreme Court and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, nonpartisan? And so this is the thing that we struggle with, isn't it? Because Jesus took that coin and he said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is to God. And that mystified them, and frankly, it mystifies us sometimes, doesn't it? And it's so easy to get caught up in it all. So we're going to continue to struggle through this process on this podcast and try to understand the best we can. Where is our place? A place to stand. Archimedes said, give me a place to stand and I will change the world. Okay, very good. But where we are today is the subpoint or subtext of this idea that we are to make different disciples for a difficult age. We have a couple of inputs that we've had in the first few programs. One is that we've been discussing about what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, that we should destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God, and that we are to be engaged in the ideas and the concepts of the culture. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Also, Leslie Newbegin, someone you know, if you've listened to this podcast, I respect greatly, has talked about establishing a missionary encounter with the world. And he says a missionary encounter is where we don't withdraw, where we don't assimilate or accommodate or get swept up in it or become a prisoner of it. And he says that there are certain things we need to do in order to establish a missionary encounter with our culture. Very good. I'm going to review that in just a moment as well. But also, there's this statement by Charles Malik, the great Lebanese scholar and statesman and wonderful Christian man, who spoke at the 1982 dedication of the Billy Graham Center. Not 50,000, maybe 10,000 people were there, including Billy Graham, at the dedicated the new center there in Wheaton, Illinois. And this great statesman said this, and it really does resonate to me now. It's very powerful, very penetrating right now. He says, the problem is not only to win souls, and I think that this is what we mean by we've done a really good job of getting people to pray prayers, walk aisles, join churches, be good church members, be good workers in our congregations, all these kinds of things, even though that's increasingly difficult and challenging, which of course is related to our subject. He said, the problem is not only to win souls, but to save minds. If you win the whole world and lose the mind of the world, you will soon discover you have not won the world. Indeed, it may turn out you have actually lost the world. That's the sense I have, is that we've lost the world. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So God gave himself fully to this world. And we give ourselves fully to it as well in the same way for the same reasons he did. And of course, we are in the world, but not being of the world. That's almost a cliche, but many cliches are cliches because they're true, or they're important, or they're memorable. All right, so let's move on. And today we're talking very specifically and introducing a kind of a pivot in Paul's thinking. So in doing so, we go to the book of Romans, which is maybe his most famous argument for the need for God. And he takes us back in chapter 1 of Romans to this famous statement. in verse 18 in the New Living Translation. As we know, Jesus wasn't speaking in the New Living Translation, but I do. But God showed his anger from heaven against all sinful and wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, or who by their wickedness prevent the truth from being known, I might add. So in situation is that God is angry about something. And what he's angry about is anyone or anything that gets in the way of people knowing him. And that's why we're told by Paul in his document called the Second Letter to the Corinthian Church, we destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. So what is this missionary encounter? Well, first there's confrontation, speaking up and speaking out. And when you do, you get confrontation. And this is what we are repulsed by. This is what scares us. This is what frightens us. This is where the conflict comes, even from among us, as we as Christians in the church. And, of course, we want unity. Unity is so important, it's so precious, but also there is diversity in unity. And we have to learn to live with the tension. There's going to be tension between tribes, between denominations, between leaders and followers and writers and speakers and teachers and members of the church. There's just going to be differences of opinion. We know this. We're imperfect. We're flawed. So there's going to be confrontation. But now we're talking about not only and whenever you speak up and you speak out, you'll not only get confrontation with people that you're encountering, but you'll get confrontation from people that are in your own tribe. And then he says, when you get confrontation, and this is going back to really what happened in Athens in Acts 17, you're going to get converts. There's going to be pushback and there's going to be conflict, but you'll get converts. And then the next thing is that you need to identify cultural idols that keep people from knowing God, false arguments, such as declaring the gospel clearly and without fear. You will get conflict, but you got to start identifying idols. So I guess what we would say in the beginning here is that the Christian's responsibility is to call out idols that keep people from knowing God, and that's where we are now in the process of the podcast this season number 2. It's not quite as simple as tearing down a statue alongside a chariot path in 700 years before Christ in Israel, something that looks like an oxen or a sea monster that was put up overnight by a local band of religious kooks. But these days, idols are ideas, aren't they? They pop up here and there, they move fast, they're hard, and they're hard to get a hold of. There are arguments that have memorable catchphrases like, if it feels good, do it. I remember that's back in the 1960s and 70s, for those of you who are old enough and whose memories are good enough to remember that. But it feels good, do it. All right? People held on to that. Another one was, if anything is okay if no one gets hurt. However, of course, people forgot the fact that when you take drugs, for example, you get hurt, you hurt yourself, and you don't realize you're hurting anybody because it feels so good, but you are hurting yourself and you're hurting other people, you're hurting your future, you're not really thinking clearly. There's a reason people don't let you rent a car until you're 25 years old. And there's medical reasons for that, and there's societal reasons, maturation reasons. But how about all we need is love, or all you need is love? That's another good one. Remember John and Yoko naked in the bed in the front of Rolling Stone magazine? Well, I do anyway. That's about as racy as it got back in those days. All you need is love. Well, of course, love, what kind of love? What do you mean by love? Tough love? Do you mean love as an action taken for the benefit of others? Do you mean love as in 1 Corinthians 13? I don't think that's exactly what they were talking about. but it's a good impulse. It's a good human impulse. Everybody wants love and peace and quiet and prosperity. I think if you're human, that's kind of what you want, unless you're demented in some way. And then there's, of course, the sinister, a woman's right to choose. And I've often said, even from as a young pastor back in the 1970s, talking about the abortion issue, that you have a right to choose not to get pregnant. But then, of course, people say, well, you're just a man. You're just so callous. You don't understand the situation. And you're right. I am, well, maybe I'm not so callous, but definitely I'm a man. Yes, I've never given birth. That's true. All those things are true about me. But at the same time, I think that we, as a society, need to establish the fact of what is life, and that you balance a woman's right to choose culturally. And I don't expect, I really don't, non-Christian people to have much of a conscience about this issue. But because in other words, their sensibility, they have a conscience, but their sensibilities are not biblically based. That's my point. So we have all of these kinds of statements. These statements separate freedom from authority. It separates freedom from morality, from self-denial, from the discipline and perseverance which could indeed lead to freedom to overcome human weakness and destruction. How about the freedom, to do something, not just the freedom from something? So it's about, how about the freedom to play Chopin or Beethoven on the piano, or the violin with abandon, a joy that is reserved only for those whose discipline and practice have freed them to achieve such heights. There are so many idols that need to be identified and captured here and put on trial and sentenced for their life. So I need to take a deep breath and take a break. And so here is Steve Simmons, the golden voice, talking about how you can be involved in the Bonhoeffer Project. And just remember, we have this special thing right now. I'm recording here on, I think it's the 21st of September, on Monday morning. And I think in a few days, we have a new, what we call virtual, a virtual cohort of the Bonhoeffer Project getting started. And with Brandon Bathauer, who is a pastor, pastor of maturity, actually, at Saddleback Church. Yes, the Saddleback Church. Yes, Rick Warren's church. And he is going to be teaching that and leading in a one-year process that's going to be really different. Asynchronistic is the word I've learned to say, at least partly well enough to be on air with. And so listen to all this, and we'll be back in just a moment.
We turn leaders into disciple makers. That's the mission of the Bonhoeffer Project. But before we can turn you into a disciple-making leader, we need you to be in a cohort. A cohort is a 1-year, 10-meeting, book reading, praying, wrestling, writing, planning challenge that has the potential to change you and thus redirect your life. Interested? Here's the process. Go to our website, thebonhoefferproject.com, and complete the application form. We will contact you. We will then help you select the type of cohort that's best for you. In person, online, or online school, which is asynchronous, so it's not affected by time zones and anyone in the world can access it. Oh, and training is now also available in Spanish. In the meantime, subscribe to the show, read one of Bill's books, and send us a question you want Bill or some member of the Bonhoeffer team to answer. And now, back to the show.
Well, thank you, Steve. Now we're back to Romans 1:18. So I'm just going to do something really old school here, pick up this really very heavy Bible. Those of you watching this on YouTube, sorry about that you have to watch this, but here we go. Romans 1:18. But God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful and wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Verse 19, they know the truth about God because he made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky through everything God made. They can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. All right, that's where we start. God appears to be angry. The word orge, or wrath, means rightly directed anger toward evil. Now, God is very angry about evil. And the question comes, where does evil come from? Well, I don't know the answer. It has to be somehow a part of the divine recipe. It has to be part of what, if God says one part choice, and if you have choice, without choice, you can't have love. Without choice to love, you have to have hate. And this is way beyond me. But so that's why I find the Bible embraceable truth, not that thing I can reason out without revelation. When you reason without revelation, you end up frustrated, you end up cynical, you end up upset, you end up argumentative. You don't end up really getting to know God. Because God has set certain rules and parameters, and we don't have control over that. And you have to come to a point of just understanding that. This is the goal of nearly everyone, from the far left anti-war protester to the Navy SEAL with a knife in his teeth and a gun in his hand, and that's to get rid of evil. God's anger isn't lurking as much as it's going to be revealed. The word apocalypse means to be revealed. Apocalypse now, apocalypse soon, apocalypse forever. In general, we begin by identifying and calling out anyone and everyone who suppresses the truth. And that's the first idol we're going to call out here, is the suppression of the truth. I recently saw a book skeptical to global warming, and it was called Apocalypse Never. Thought it was a great title. I don't know, I'm not going to get into that subject today, but it's apocalypse is the thing that people use this word to mean disaster, the end, destruction, finality, climax, judgment, all those kinds of things. Religious skeptics don't think that God will let the hammer of justice down or bring this moral drama to an end. The apocalypse that is God's second coming and judgment is mocked, ridiculed. People don't seem to be all that frightened about it, but it says that when we all look up and we see him coming back, the world will be frozen in fear. Those who do suppress the truth do so with what is called wickedness. Wickedness is a word we don't use much anymore. It's something that we don't have well defined, but here is what the word means. It's seldom used word which means a willful decision to do sin or to do evil, that you know what you're doing. God's anger is directed at those who willfully choose to suppress the revealed truth from God about God himself and humans in the state of this world. So suppression, or pushing down of something, is fundamental to Lucifer's global strategy. I'm reminded of watching cable news. Something as simple as the evening news is infuriating to watch. Networks routinely suppress the storyline they don't agree with. The press used to be the referee, and they would hold each political party accountable. But you can turn to CNN and watch what is being covered, then switch to Fox News and conclude that they are reporting on two different universes. And their power is not only in the questions asked, but on what is not covered. It is also revealed in their guests, their online talent, their analysts. Their views are so in step with the network philosophy rather than down the middle hard news. We long for the days of Huntley and Brinkley. Now, I'm going way back to the 1950s now when I was a child myself, but it was almost deadpan. If you ever wanted to laugh, really, and go back and look at this, it was quite instructive of how nonpartisan the news people were. Now, I don't know what their views were, but we didn't know what Walter Cronkite believed. We didn't know what Chet Huntley believed, or David Brinkley, or many of these classic journalists. And so some of you have grown up with journalism that's always been opinionated. I grew up with the journalism that was nonpartisan. And so when you see here older people criticizing today as not journalism, that's because of the background we have. So it depends on your political views, and you find yourself either murmuring to yourself or shouting at the television or simply shutting it off and leaving the room. The number of people I talk to now that won't watch the news is growing. And I think it's a good idea. You know, click it off, because it really is not good for your emotional health, particularly if you care about it. And this is the kind of disgust that I think God experiences when he sees his opponents suppressing the truth about him, because it keeps people from knowing the truth about him. He's angry about this. Now, this argument, even though I just used a political argument or illustration, is not about politics. You know, everything in life is political in that there's give and take and compromise and debate and disagreement and so on. And then you come to a general consensus and you move ahead on that. But the difference is politics is arguing about what is true. And frankly, they rarely find it or agree on it. And I think that's true today. Republicans have a certain amount of truth and Democrats have a certain amount of truth. And there's tension. And what's made our country work so well is that we've been able to live in this tension and compromise and find ways to get through life together. And it's made our country wonderful and great and terrific. And we're losing that capability now. And because of the loss of that capability and that capacity in the public realm, and that the moral strength of our character, our national character, is weakening, and truth as a category is collapsing, that's why many of us are concerned. God, however, is the source of all truth, and this is where we're going here. And our lives, very lives, depend on knowing and living by that truth. Not knowing the truth is deadly. It rips apart the world into tribes who war against each other. It separates humans from their creator, and evil flourishes. Now, the facts are obvious. It says in Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, as we continue the argument that Paul is making, they know the truth about God because he's made it obvious to them. For ever since the world has been created, people have seen the earth and sky. Who hasn't just wondered, looking at the cloud formations or the beauty of the earth, just by taking it all in, day or night. And you just see it and you say, there has to be a God. There has to be something out there. And we're made in his image because we are made in sync with this to appreciate it and see it as beautiful. Through everything God has made, it says, they can clearly see his invisible qualities. You know, when you just hear thunder, or you experience lightning, or you see the vastness of the earth, or you look at a shot of the earth from outer space, from the moon, for example, you see his eternal power and his divine nature. So, just fundamentally, there's no excuse for not knowing God. That we know there's a God on a certain level. Everyone knows it. In order to qualify as a willful suppressor, though, of God's truth, it makes sense that you would have to have ready access to that truth. So that means that people know God. They have an understanding of God. 94% of people say, yeah, there's something out there greater than us. God is not indiscreetly ready to take out every ignorant human being, because the Bible says that he actually winked at or overlooked the ignorance of the past. But now that Christ has come, He is calling everybody to follow Jesus. That's from the book of Acts as well. But his targets are the ones who know the truth and who suppress it and keep the knowledge of God from those who need it. Who then is in danger? That's the question here. Who's in danger? Well, there's the pseudo-intellectuals, some that with degrees and who have read a couple of books, who deny the obvious reality of God. Now, you have to work very hard to do this. You have to kind of twist yourself into some sort of philosophic pretzel in order to say, well, there's no God. We absolutely know that. And so contemporary philosophy and its stepchild, which is progressive theology, is that you can't really know anything. And this is something that we can thank Immanuel Kant for, the philosopher who they said was such an ordinary man, who lived such an ordinary life that you could set the village clock by him, by his walking to work each day. But he went to work and he did a lot of damage at work. The son of a preacher, which is sometimes the way it goes. He says that you can't really believe your own eyes. Your perception is just your perception. But then Hegel, who came somewhat after him, who was a famous German theologian and philosopher, who was one of the founders of the University of Berlin, Hegel's infamous dialectic, which is you have a thesis, and this is his idea about truth. You know, you have a thesis, and then you have an antithesis, and then you debate the dialectic. You debate, it comes together in what is called synthesis. And so truth is a blend of opposing ideas synced together. And then the ascension of human ideas and ideals go up this escalator, if you like. And it goes up this escalator, and we improve and become brighter and smarter and more interesting and more enlightened. As the great philosopher Dallas Willard said, if you laid every philosopher in the world end to end, they couldn't reach a conclusion. In fact, I remember one time he just casually said that a philosopher is the most happy after he's talked to you for an hour and you're still scratching your head and you have no clue as to what's going on. So human reason is a tool. It's a wonderful ability that makes science possible, but has not and never will scratch the surface of the true nature of reality. Revealed truth is the doorway to reality. And that is what God is upset about. Don't suppress my message, God is saying. Don't reject your visitation in Jesus Christ. Let the light of the world shine through. Don't suppress it. So the fundamental platform on which suppression of truth stands is sinister motive to oppose God. Paul mentions this in the penetrating phrases. They know the truth about God. It's obvious to them through creation, everything that was made. It's obvious, it's clear, it's visible. If they don't know God, it's because they have very deeply seated reason not to. He goes on to tell us why. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. They began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Now, this explains really what's going on all around us right now. In these dark, chaotic times, people are confused. There's lots of foolish ideas. As a result, people get lost. So to know God in this case means they have ample evidence for his existence, his divine nature, his eternal power, and the natural response would be to worship God and to thank him. But instead, and I think it's easily proved, that the majority of people choose to suppress him and to invent silly ideas about him. But why? Well, we're going to talk about certain revolutions now. There's the cultural revolution. There is the sexual revolution. There is the perversity or perverse revolution. And finally, the lawless revolution. But before any of these other revolutions can take place, there must be the death of God revolution. There's only one answer as to why people became wicked. Their leader, Lucifer, is wicked. And his goal is to destroy everything that God has created and loved. He is determined to kill what God loves the most, his creation. People don't become wicked. We are actually born wicked. From our viewpoint, we choose it. And why do we choose it? Well, we don't quite know, do we? We do know, however, that when we do choose it, we have done something wrong or nonsensical. It is something like a mad, mad genius. You know, Frederick Nietzsche, who reportedly said, "We have killed God, and the world doesn't have enough water to wash its blood off our hands." Now, that's my summary. Nietzsche was someone who said the problem with killing God and having the blood on our hands is that we're incapable of rebuilding our own structure of morality. He was very skeptical about whether we could do that or not. And I think he's been right, that we're not very good at it. The only thing we really have is our conscience. And we have some guidance from just what's happened in previous generations. And we're living on the remnants, the good parts of the Western civilization. Much of it is living off of the bounty of the Judeo-Christian ethic. And it's getting less and less and less each generation. Now, the atheist doesn't really live with a clear conscience. He actually lives with a seared conscience, or a state of suspension of his innate knowledge. He's mad at God for existing. And since he's mad at God for existing, he's mad about God for not doing a better job about the world, which is, of course, one of those things where you say, can I just shake my head for a moment? So the first idol to be identified, and for us to kind of laugh off the stage, actually, based on the evidence, is that God either doesn't exist or is some kind of manufactured being too weak to control his world, too cold to care for it, too occupied with other worlds and projects, that we are somewhere lost on his desk under a pile of papers. We're not very high on his to-do list. These inventions are about as plausible as the dancing Jesus bobblehead that my son gave me for Christmas, that I keep right back here. In fact, I'm going to take a moment to get it. So this is the little dancing Jesus bobblehead that my son gave me as a joke a couple of years ago for a Christmas present. I guess he was really struggling to figure out what to give me. But and I probably should put this little guy out in the garage. But that's about how silly this whole thing is, that there's no God. It made me laugh, but you know, I've never once surrounded it with fruit and flowers and bowed before it. I've never prayed to it. It's just a stupid little doll. And I do think I'll put it away. Well, it's time for a break. And we'll soon hear more about how you can write in, how you can subscribe. We will answer your questions on air. So do so. We'll see you in a moment.
If you want to expand the disciple-making movement, then share the show with your friends and colleagues. Hey, it's easy to subscribe. Simply go to iTunes or to our website, thebonhoefferproject.com, then click on The Bonhoeffer Show. Once you do, we will keep you updated with the Bonhoeffer Project's events, new materials and books, as well as the larger disciple-making movement current news. You can also access previous programs. And be sure to read Bill's weekly column, which is posted on the website. Remember, ask questions. Bill's answers are guaranteed to give you herd immunity, increase your IQ, and cause you to experience waves of euphoria. Well, not really, but his answers are really good. And now, let's get back to the Bonhoeffer Show.
All right, we're back. So we're back. This is our popular culture section, just talking about things of interest. I've been debating what I'm going to do. Am I going to watch the NBA playoffs? I've watched a few of them. They've been pretty good. I'm a Laker fan, and I expect the Lakers to win it all. But I'm a little concerned about the Miami Heat. But the Celtics, the Celtics have won, I think, 17 world championships. The Lakers have won 16. And I think maybe the Lakers want the Celtics so they can tie them 17-17. Going back to the early days of Bill Russell, I have great respect for Bill Russell and the Celtics of in the mid 50s. But I have to say that I was a Laker fan even with Jerry West and Elgin Baylor when I was growing up and living in Indiana. For some reason, I just liked their style more than I did the Celtics. And I really learned to dislike the Celtics. I don't know why. And even to this day, I'm sure the Celtic people are good people, but I just don't like the Celtics. What can I say? I was thinking about the best and the worst of the week. And I guess even though I hesitate to get into this subject, I'm going to anyway. John MacArthur has become a national symbol, I guess, of stick it to the man or stick it to the Democratic governor or mayor, whoever it happens to be at the time. Here in California, we have John MacArthur. We call him Johnny Mac. At least I call him Johnny Mac. Sticking it to Gavin Newsom and Eric Garcetti, who Gavin Newsom, for you don't know, is the governor of California. Eric Garcetti is the mayor of Los Angeles. I happen to live just outside the city of Los Angeles in a wonderful city called Long Beach, which is, as far as politics, is quite liberal. But interestingly enough, this is not really about all that. What I really want to talk about is John MacArthur and his going to church and his church having thousands of people at it. And he may be technically right. I think he is technically right about the First Amendment, the separation of church and state. I think he's on pretty good legal ground. Now, the other part of it, though, is Johnny Mac is not I don't believe he's the person that we should say everybody should act like Johnny Mac, because he's got a special situation where he can't meet other than the way he is meeting. And so for that reason, I give him props. I mean, he stands up. He's a stand-up guy. He stood up. He has great relationship with the LAPD. They won't even take action against him. At the same time, I don't think he's a model for everybody else, because I think everybody else has to sort it out. But I'm asked about this quite often, and my opinion is he has a right to do it technically. He has, if that's what he wants to do, he has to pay the price for doing it. And so I respect him for it. I don't know if I'd make the same decision. I don't know exactly what I would do, because I don't have a local congregation that I pastor. Right now, pastors have a huge amount of pressure on them. It's not enviable to be in their position. It's a great time of opportunity, but it's a great time of stress and not really knowing what to do. We should certainly just pray for all the pastors in America and for wisdom in this minefield in which they're functioning and ministering to people right now. Now, I think that there's probably, other things in the news. One of the things I thought, one of the things I did pick up from John MacArthur is he has this pretty good argument about society, and I thought maybe this would help those of you who, are looking for ways to have a template to describe what really are the restraints of society. And MacArthur puts it this way, and I think it's pretty clear biblical teaching. I think that most of us know it. But first, there's the things that restrain evil in culture. Number one is the conscience, the human conscience. Secondly is the family, to build, to restrain evil, to domesticate, to teach young people to love and care for other people. Thirdly is the government. And fourthly is the church. And that right now, the church is playing a big role in this, and this is why it's so difficult to lead one, but why it's so rich with opportunity. And because the next step is anarchy and chaos. And that does concern, I think, really all citizens of the United States who care about this whole thing and whether we can trust what's going on in our country. And so that's something that we just need to really think about, pray about. And so I think the greatest thing we can do is to live our lives as representatives of the kingdom of God, render unto Caesar what's Caesar, and God unto God, and live that way. Okay, I'm done. That's it for today. So here's what I would like for us all to do. Follow Jesus, and he'll teach us everything you'll ever need to know.
Well, we hope that the show wasn't too bad. Jane Hull wants everyone to know that if anything Bill said was offensive, she feels your pain. If you were upset by anything Bill and his guests said, well, mission accomplished. At the Bonhoeffer Show, we value irreverent, satirical, and generally inappropriate behavior. But when it comes to fulfilling the Great Commission, we don't mess around. Remember, subscribe. We promise. No private jets, no white suits, and definitely no toupees.